I used to measure nights in cups of coffee and miles on bald tires, but the night that split our lives in two, I measured in breaths. My son's small, rattling breaths in the backseat of a car that had stalled outside a 24-hour laundromat on Linden Avenue in Dayton, Ohio. The dashboard clock bled a blunt red 2:38 a.m. The sodium lights painted my knuckles the color of old bruises. It was late January, the kind of cold that bites through denim and turns the air into needles. Eli was 8 years old, wrapped in my thrift store coat, while I pressed the heel of my hand against the steering wheel and begged the engine to remember how to be a heart. I whispered numbers to keep from crying. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3, until the counting felt like a spell, a tiny private ritual to keep my son warm, to keep the frost from creeping across the inside of the windshield like a white spider web. I had already finished job 1, night laundry at St. Bridget's Hospital, where sheets came back from surgery stiff with the silence of rooms that didn't clap for survivors. Job 2 would start at 5, waitressing the graveyard shift at the diner near the interstate, the one that smelled like burnt syrup and old stories. Job 3 began at 11, stocking shelves at Randall's, where the fluorescent lights made everyone's eyes look tired and far away. Between them, I wedged DoorDash runs, babysitter drop-offs, grocery lines, and the staggered collapse of a body that slept in elevator bits. 7 minutes leaned against a locker, 11 minutes on a church pew while Eli colored in the lines of borrowed dinosaur books. That night, the cold had a sound. It hissed under the hood and crawled into my bones, turning the word tomorrow into a dare. My phone screen flickered at 10%. I scrolled past the overdue notice for the electricity bill, past the text from my landlord, "Mara, we need to talk. The rent's late again," past the school newsletter that said there would be a parent career day, and did anyone want to come talk about what they did for a living? My thumbs hovered over the keypad. Useless. What could I say? That my career was keeping a child fed on the mercy of 100 strangers? That my title was mother, housekeeper, waitress, night stalker, runner of errands, collector of pennies, breaker of fatigue? The laundromat door buzzed, and an old man in a camo jacket stepped out, steam and heat curling after him like a ghost. He offered me a jump start. His battery worked a small miracle, the kind you can buy at an auto shop and still call divine. When my engine coughed back to life, I cried, big, ugly, unphotogenic tears that scalded my face and fogged my glasses. He pretended not to notice, just tugged his hat down and said, "Keep him warm, all right?" I thanked him like I was trying to pay a debt I could never repay. As I pulled onto the road, Eli stirred and mumbled, "Mama, did I miss the shooting stars?" "No, baby," I whispered. "Not tonight." Though the truth was we had missed 1,000 small meteors, bedtimes, school projects that required poster boards I couldn't afford, movie nights that turned into shift swaps, mornings where I wasn't a ghost strapping a lunchbox to a backpack on autopilot. The engine steadied. My hands steadied. And under that terrible orange glow of streetlights, I felt something like a promise press its thumb into my ribs, as if the night itself leaned close to tell me there would be a before and an after, and I was still standing in the doorway between them. I didn't know then that one decision, tiny, private, against the grain of how I had survived for years, would crack open a future I didn't dare picture. I didn't know the cost of that decision, the way it would burn on the way down like hard truth or cheap whiskey, or that hope sometimes arrives wearing a stranger's name tag. I only knew that the air tasted like metal, that my son's breath had steadied, and that I had 1 more mile to go before I could pretend morning was just another word for mercy. But the worst was still ahead, and what it demanded from me would make the night of counting breaths look like a lullaby. My name is Mara Thompson, 32, single mother, chief economist of a wallet that never learned how to stretch without tearing. I rent a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that leans the way tired people lean. Just a little. Just enough to make you think of falling. The carpet is the color of apologies. The windows whistle when the wind changes its mind. From our balcony, you can see the traffic lights bend over Main Street, and the corner where the bus stop is always crowded with people holding their breath between almosts. If you're watching this from somewhere warm, somewhere bright, tell me in the comments where you are. Tell me if your night has a whistle. Tell me if you've ever had to choose between a phone bill and a field trip. I raised my son alone while working 3 jobs. That sentence has gravity. It looks heavy in print, but it still can't hold what it felt like. The bone-deep ache that never turned off, the dial stuck on, barely. People think 3 jobs means 3 paychecks. It meant 3 uniforms hung to dry over the bathtub, 3 sets of rules about bathroom breaks and clock-in times. 3 bosses who said, "We're like a family here," and meant it until I asked for an extra 10 minutes to make a school drop-off or leave early because the sitter's car wouldn't start. It meant learning how to sleep in slivers and smile in pieces. It meant teaching my son that love is loud even when money is whispering threats through the vents. Maybe you're watching this from a city where the buildings are glass and the coffee costs more than my groceries. Maybe you're watching this from a couch that remembers your shape, where your only problem tonight is a show to binge. If so, I'm happy for you, truly. I used to turn happiness into a ration, saving it for later like canned peaches. But I learned that joy is its own act of rebellion for people like me. So if you're listening, if you hear your own story echoing under mine, hit subscribe. Leave a comment telling me where you are, what you carry, what you hide. Tell me if you've ever had a landlord say, "We need to talk," and you felt your stomach drop like an elevator cut loose. We lived by a calendar scribbled with arrows. Eli's school nurse appointment at 8:10 a.m., shift at St. Brigid's from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., diner from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., Randall's from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., DoorDash from 5 p.m. to whenever the tips stopped breathing. On Sundays, we went to the public library because warmth and Wi-Fi don't ask for proof of worthiness. Eli built cities out of Lego bricks at the kids' table while I filled out forms with tiny boxes that demanded answers. Do you have dependents? Yes. Have you applied for assistance in the last 30 days? Yes. Are you currently employed? 3 times over. Please explain your hardship in 500 characters or less, as if it could be contained, as if the ache had grammar. There was a woman at church named Ms. Alvarez who babysat Eli when I couldn't barter my way into another solution. She never asked for more than I could give. Sometimes she slid empanadas into my hands, as if food were a secret handshake. Once, when my gas got cut, she said, "Mija, borrow my space heater." And when I tried to return it with a thank you note, she tucked it back into my arms with a look that said dignity wasn't a thing I had to prove. I carried that look into rooms that wanted me smaller. I kept it like a flare in my pocket for when the dark began to crowd in. People talk about resilience like it's a badge. I think of it like scar tissue. Proof that healing happened, sure, but also proof of the wound. Every bill I juggled was a lesson in physics. What goes up must be negotiated. Every shift I picked up was a math problem. X hours times Y tips equals Z less hunger. But there was a conspiracy in the margins. Fees that stacked like invisible bricks. Interest that multiplied like bad rumors. Processing delays that turned $200 into exactly too late. Sometimes I swear the system learned my schedule and waited until the night I had the least sleep to drop the next demand. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever opened your bank app with your heart choking itself, tune in. Stick with me, because the decision that changed everything didn't arrive with a drum roll. It arrived on a Tuesday in a cheap font, a piece of paper half torn from a bulletin board. I almost threw it away. I almost missed the door that was about to swing open. And even after I walked through, I didn't know yet that when a door opens, you still have to decide what you'll leave behind to fit through it. So, if you're with me, subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the hardest choice you've had to make with a kid asleep in the next room. Tell me if you've ever had hope slide into your life wearing an ordinary face and a name you didn't think belonged to you. Because I promise you, this story turns. It turns hard. And just when I thought I'd found a new path, the pavement cracked under my feet, and the worst was still to come. The first wheel came off in the hospital basement, where the laundry machines roar like big animals, and the air hangs heavy with the clean ache of bleach. I was hauling a sack of surgical gowns, when my supervisor, a woman with a voice like clipped coupons, said, "Mara, we're cutting hours next month. Budget thing." She smiled the way people smile when they're sorry for the weather. "You're one of our best. But nights are slow. We have to trim." Trim, like I was a hedge. I nodded like a good soldier while my brain ran math I didn't want to see. Fewer hospital hours meant more diner shifts. More diner shifts meant fewer hours free for Eli's homework pages that said, "Parent signature," in a cheerful font. And Randall's, well, Randall's had already banned overtime unless corporate blessed it with incense and a memo. I stood there, hands stinging from hot cotton, and felt something crack. Not the loud break of despair, but the slow split of a seam that has been stretched too long. The second wheel came off in the car, 2 days later, when the check engine light turned itself into a little yellow sun that never set. The mechanic said words like timing belt and cat converter, and all I heard was, 2 weeks' pay. I smiled until my cheeks trembled, wrote a post-dated check I prayed would be a prophecy fulfilled, and told myself that miracles sometimes look like loans. That night, I door-dashed with the heater broken and my breath visible, a poor person's weather map. Tips were thin. An order went missing. Someone reported me as late, when I was exactly as fast as traffic would let me be. 2 stars. Disappointing? I swallowed a retort because ratings were oxygen. The third wheel didn't exactly come off. It got stolen. I came home from the diner to find our laundry basket missing from the hallway, and Eli's science project, 2 shoeboxes taped into a solar oven, crumpled under a footprint. The landlord shrugged. Not my problem. Maybe don't leave things out. I searched for a new apartment that night, scrolling until the listings blurred, and learned that security deposits are magical numbers invented to teach you humility. I messaged a guy renting a basement studio with a shared bathroom, and decided I would rather sleep in our car than raise my son in a room without sunlight. Choice is a flexible word when you're broke. Sometimes all it means is which sacrifice happens first. Then the school called. Eli had fallen asleep at his desk twice in a week. His teacher's voice was kind but careful, like talking around a bruise. "We're concerned," she said. "He's bright, but he seems heavy. My son, with his Lego cities and his toothy smile that looked like a lighthouse. I swallowed the boulder in my throat and promised I would make sure he got more rest, the way you promised to make it stop raining. Here's the conspiracy part, the way trouble doesn't come solo. It arrives like a pack, circling. The electricity bill was higher because the space heater drank more power than a secret. The SNAP benefits recertification required a letter from my employer confirming my hours, but the HR portal was experiencing delays. The sitter caught the flu. The bus app glitched and ate my last $20 in prepaid fares without giving me a ride. And through all of it, there was a clock inside my chest, tick-ticking like a bomb. How long can I keep this spinning? How long before something explodes? In the middle of this storm, I found a flyer taped crooked on the library bulletin board. Sterile processing technician, 12-week certification, tuition covered for qualifying applicants, guaranteed interview at St. Bridget's. I stood there, dripping melted snow onto the carpet, reading the words like they were in a language I used to know. Guaranteed interview, tuition covered, 12 weeks. I Googled in a whisper, afraid the promise would hear me and run. Sterile processing, people who clean and prepare surgical instruments, the ones who make sure nothing inside the tray carries a shadow. It was not glamorous, but it was stable. It was 1 job with benefits, more money than 3 jobs without. It was a ladder bolted to a wall I had been clawing at with my fingernails. I took the pamphlet home and hid it under the sink as if hope were contraband. Because the math, again. 12 weeks meant classes, 3 evenings a week and Saturdays. It meant cutting shifts. It meant asking Ms. Alvarez for more than I had ever asked. It meant risking the fragile tower of tips and hours for a certificate that might not, translate into a paycheck that didn't bleed out by the 15th. I stared at the ceiling that night while Eli slept, the plaster crack above my pillow shaped like a river I was afraid to cross. I'll think about it, I told myself, because saying yes felt like a betrayal of the hustle that had kept us alive, because committing to the program felt like leaning into a future that might not catch us, because the people around me, good people, had tried before and been burned. I watched a friend get scammed by a career school that took her aid and gave her a piece of paper worth less than the ink. I had learned to distrust any door that opened too easily. Still, I carried the pamphlet in my backpack like a talisman. At the diner, between refilling coffee and pretending not to hear the men in suits talk about cutting dead weight, I traced the edges of the paper like it held a key. At Randall's, while my hands learned again and again the geometry of stacking cans perfectly straight, I pictured a different uniform. At St. Bridget's, when I hauled trays and watched nurses glide by in scrubs the color of sea glass, I imagined a badge with my name on it that didn't say temp. And then, the call, the landlord again. Mara, the rent. His voice had lost its patience. End of the week or I file. He said it flat, like a weather report. I hung up and found myself at the library again, in front of the bulletin board, the pamphlet now pinned under a dozen lost dog notices, and a poster for a blood drive. My hands moved before my fear could catch up. I took a picture of the application link and the class schedule. I went to a computer, logged in, and filled out the form. Name, address, employment status, Tell us about your motivation. I wrote, I want to be the woman who makes sure that when a surgeon opens a body, the only surprise is the one that saves a life. Then I hovered over submit with my finger shaking. I didn't click it. Not yet. Because I knew that button would ask me to rearrange the whole fragile solar system of our life. I closed the browser. I told myself, tomorrow. But tomorrow had other plans, and the worst of it was still inching toward us on quiet feet. The disconnection notice was pink, a cheerful insult. Final. It fluttered on our door like a flag I hadn't agreed to wave. We were 2 days shy of a shutoff when the sitter called to say she couldn't take Eli that week. Fever. I texted 3 friends. No luck. The hospital called. I was on last-minute shift change for a double. Can't, I said, and heard the line of patients fray. At the diner, a traveling baseball team ate like locusts and tipped like they were allergic to gratitude. At Randall's, a pallet jack malfunctioned and I jumped back just in time to save my foot and lose the last 5 minutes of courage I had left. That night, Eli wheezed a little in his sleep. His asthma always got worse when the heat dipped and the windows leaked. I lay next to him listening, counting breaths again, fear humming under my skin like electricity. At 4:12 a.m., the apartment went from thinly lit to nothing. I thought for a second I had gone blind. The heater stopped its rattling. The fridge sighed and went quiet. Silence swelled like a bruise. I sat up, and the darkness pressed a palm over my mouth. I had 2 options, beg or break. Both felt like knives. I laced my boots and walked down the hall to Ms. Alvarez's door, hating the sound my knuckles made against her wood like a small, stubborn drum. She opened wearing a robe scattered with pink roses. She took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. Vente, she said, and I brought Eli and the backpack and the guilt that grew teeth. We camped in her living room for 2 nights while I called the utility company and begged like a woman on the edge of a cliff. We have a payment assistance program, the woman said, voice scripted. If you can pay half today. Half was a number I could have loved on another week. That week, it was a dare I couldn't meet. There must be something, I said, and my voice cracked like thin ice. Silence, keyboard clacking. We can do a one-time extension of 48 hours. I thanked her like she'd put out a fire, even though the flames were still biting the walls. On the second day, I took a call from the school in the hallway because I didn't want Eli to see my face crack open again. The guidance counselor had a voice that sounded like chamomile tea. We've noticed Eli's been tired and hungry, more than usual. The shame that climbed my throat then was not mine to carry, and yet it climbed anyway, a vine with barbs. We have a weekend food program, she said. No questions asked. I pressed my forehead against the cool paint and closed my eyes. Yes, I whispered. Yes, please. Yes to anything that looked like a lifeline. That night, back at our dark apartment with borrowed blankets, I pulled the program pamphlet from my backpack and spread it on the floor. 12 weeks. Monday, Wednesday, Saturday evenings. I saw Eli's face in the glow of my phone. He watched me the way kids watch weather. Is it bad? He asked. I thought of all the times I had smoothed the truth like a bedsheet, tucking in the corners so it wouldn't wrinkle. I thought of how that habit had slowly turned me into a ghost of a woman I used to be, someone who hid storms behind closed doors so no one would worry. It's hard, I said, but we're not broken. He nodded like a man twice his size. Okay, he said. Can I sleep in my hoodie? I laughed a little, the sound startling in the dark. Yes, you can. Here's the moment, the fulcrum. It didn't look like a cinematic leap. It looked like a mother with grit in her teeth. I opened the application again. I wrote a new paragraph. I want my son to see me choose the future over the fear that built this present. I want to be home at night. I want to stop counting breaths in cars. I clicked submit. The word vanished. The page spun. Application received, it said. I sat back and let the terror flood me because I knew. I had just declared war on the life that had kept us alive, and the life fought back. Within 48 hours, Randall's cut my hours entirely for the next schedule. Availability conflict. The diner manager said if I couldn't do doubles, he had plenty of hungrier girls. The hospital posted the updated rotation. Nights were slashed. Income plummeted. My chest felt like it held a nest of bees. I borrowed $200 from a coworker who never asked for it back. I sold the television. I canceled every subscription down to the $4 photo storage app that held Eli's baby pictures. I told myself, this is a tunnel. Tunnels are made for getting somewhere else. But tunnels are also dark, and the dark does strange things to hope. On the first night of class, I almost didn't go. Eli had a cough. The bus was late. My shoelace snapped. The city seemed to conspire in 1,000 petty ways to keep me in place. Ms. Alvarez put a hand on my cheek. "Go," she said. "Bring me back a story." The classroom was brighter than anything I'd been in for years. The instructor's name was Hannah, and she didn't talk down to us. She treated everyone, the ex-cook, the former cashier, the single father from the shelter, like we were arriving, not escaping. She held up a tray of shiny instruments. "These can kill," she said evenly, "or they can heal. Your job is the difference." The room went quiet, the sacred kind. For a while, it felt like the tunnel might have a light. I learned to assemble clamps by feel, to read the sterilizer logs like a language, to see not just metal, but all the hands that would be safer because of mine. Eli did his homework at Ms. Alvarez's table beside me, both of us hunched over different futures, our pencils scratching the same stubborn melody. I slept 4 hours, then 3, then sometimes none. My eyes learned to cry silently at red lights. Then, because the story knew I needed to be tested, the landlord filed. Eviction. Court date in 2 weeks. My stomach folded in on itself. I took the notice to Hannah because I didn't know who else to show. I expected her to offer a sympathetic grimace. Instead, she reached into her folder and pulled out a brochure for a tenants group. "Call them," she said. "Today." I hesitated. Pride is a costume that gets heavy when it's wet. "Mara," she said, reading the refusal blooming on my face. "If the building owner had a choice between pride and rent, which one do you think he'd choose?" I laughed despite myself. "Rent. So choose your child," she said. "Choose the thing that feeds him." I called. The tenants organizer, a woman named Kay, spoke like a lightning rod. "Do you have proof of the leaks? The mold? The service requests?" I did. Photos of black blooms under the window. Email chains ignored. "Good," she said. "We'll go to court together. You won't be alone." I hung up shaking, the mix of relief and rage fizzing like a chemical reaction. The system wasn't a weather pattern after all. It was a set of choices made by people with keys, and some of those keys could be turned from my side if I learned how. Court was a fluorescent purgatory. Kay stood with me, straight-backed, while the landlord's attorney coughed up legal words meant to make me feel small. Kay calmly filed a motion, slid photos across the table. Leaks, mold, the email where I begged for repairs. The judge looked at the pictures and frowned. "We can't evict someone from an uninhabitable unit," he said, as if stating a fact about gravity. He granted a stay. He ordered repairs. He ordered a partial rent abatement. I walked out feeling taller by an inch I hadn't known I'd lost. Outside the courthouse, I cried ugly again, and Kay handed me a tissue from her jacket, like she'd been waiting for that moment. "You did that," she said. "You showed up." That night, Eli and I ate peanut butter sandwiches on the floor like a picnic. The lights were back on. The apartment smelled like bleach and fresh paint, where the mold had been scraped away. I opened my sterile processing workbook and rested my forehead on the page. We were not safe yet, but we were moving. And just when the ground steadied under us, the story sprung its meanest trap, my car. On exam week, the engine died for real, not the theatrical kind. Dead. "You need a new one," the mechanic said, and when he repeated the number, the edges of the room went soft. Without the car, I couldn't do the diner before class. Without the car, I couldn't make it to the night shift when the bus line slept. Without the car, I could still finish the program, but we would not eat that month. I closed my eyes and saw 2 futures fighting. Stay with the jobs, keep the roof, let the program slip away, or quit 2 of the jobs, finish, leap, risk the freefall. The decision rose up like a wave that didn't care if I could swim. I quit the diner. I quit Randall's. I kept the hospital and the class. I told myself the scariest story I knew, that I could gamble on a version of myself I hadn't met yet. The last night before the final exam, Eli developed a fever. Not high, but real. He lay on the couch under a blanket while I checked his temperature and tried not to let my hands shake so hard the thermometer rattled. "You can go," he said, eyes glassy. "I'm okay." He was not. He was brave. Ms. Alvarez slid in like a guardian with a bowl of caldo and a look that brooked no arguments. "Study," she ordered. "Bring me back good news." I kissed Eli's forehead and walked into the cold night, counting my own breaths this time so I wouldn't run back inside. I passed. 93. Hannah hugged me in the hallway. "There's a posting in Central Sterile," she said. "Full-time. Benefits. I'll write your recommendation if you ask. My heart knocked like a fist on a locked door. I'm asking, I whispered. 2 days later, I sat in an interview room with a manager named Daryl, who had eyes that looked like they had seen a lot and judged less than most. He asked about my time in the laundry. I told him how I learned to respect the quiet details that keep bodies safe. He asked why sterile processing. I told him the truth, because I want to be part of what saves people, and because I want my son to see me choose a door that opens during the day. He looked at my file. He looked at me. When can you start? I wanted to explode. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run down the hallway and find Eli and lift him into the air like a superhero holds the world. Instead, I smiled with the kind of control you get when you've learned to hold joy lightly so it doesn't spook. Monday, I said, and that's when the phone buzzed. A text from the landlord. Repairs complete. Inspector coming tomorrow. Need you home. My stomach sank. Monday collided with court orders and inspections, and a child who still had a fever. The plot twisted one more time, because of course it did. The worst wasn't exactly worse. It was a final, precise needle. What do you do when your future and your present both demand you show up at the exact same hour? I breathed. I called Kay. She said, I'll meet the inspector. You go start your job. I called Ms. Alvarez. She said, I'll bring Eli to my place during the inspection and sit with him. I called Hannah. She said, text me when you badge in. 3 women had formed a net I hadn't known was there until I stepped off the ledge. I walked into Central Sterile that Monday with a pair of sensible shoes and a badge that beeped me through a door that smelled like metal and promise. And though the battle was not finished, something inside me unclenched that had been holding its breath since the night in the laundromat parking lot. The light wasn't at the end of the tunnel anymore. The light was on, but, because life is a trickster, the real twist was still waiting, tender and terrifying, in a manila folder on Daryl's desk. 3 weeks into the job, after I'd learned the hum of the sterilizers and the rhythm of the trays, after Eli's fever broke and the inspector signed off, and the landlord started nodding at me in the stairwell like maybe I was the weather now, Daryl asked me to step into his office. He shut the door with a soft click and slid a folder across the desk. My stomach remembered every pink notice it had ever met. Am I in trouble? I asked, and heard how quickly fear still reached for me. Open it, he said. Inside were 2 pieces of paper. The first was my hire paperwork, with an annotation I hadn't noticed. An internal scholarship application for further credentialing. Instrument specialist. Pay bump. Training included if I committed to 2 years. The second was a note in Hannah's handwriting. Mara is the kind of steady you build with. She counts precisely when others rush. She knows what it is to keep things clean when everything feels dirty. There was a sticky note on top with 1 word in Daryl's blocky script. Interested? I laughed, and it came out like a hiccup turned into a song. Yes, I said, and the word felt like a match struck in daylight. Not flashy, but heat all the same. He nodded. Good. Also, HR found something when they processed your background. You've been in the system here for years. He tapped the folder. Laundry. That time you picked up shifts in patient transport. The back pay from those overtime shifts that got miscoded? He smiled, just a little, the corner of his mouth doing the thing someone's does when they're trying to keep good news from bursting too fast. They owe you $968. It'll hit Friday. I closed my eyes. $968 is not a miracle to most people. To me, it was 10 nights of sleep bought out of layaway. It was groceries without a calculator. It was a lockbox under the bed that could finally hold something other than breath-held wishes. I went to the bathroom, locked a stall, and cried the same ugly way I'd cried over a jump start from a stranger. I pressed my hand to my mouth so the sound wouldn't echo. Then I washed my face, looked at the woman in the mirror, the one whose shoulders had lowered 1/2 inch in 3 weeks, and said the quietest thank you I've ever said. To God, to women named Hannah and Kay and Alvarez, to every version of me that hadn't given up during the darkest minutes. That weekend, Eli and I did something reckless. We bought 2 cheap lawn chairs at the discount store, carried them up the 2 flights, and set them on our tiny balcony like thrones. We celebrated with hot chocolate made on a stove that stayed hot, lights that stayed on. He told me about the book he was reading. I told him about how steam sterilization works, and he wrinkled his nose and said, "So you're like a germ ninja." "Exactly," I said. "I'm a ninja with a name tag." He leaned his head on my shoulder and said, "Mama? Yeah? I like this life. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. built on a decision I made when the world wanted me to believe I wasn't allowed to choose. Here's the last reveal, the one that feels conspiratorial only because love sometimes hides in unlikely places. The decision that changed everything wasn't clicking submit. It wasn't quitting the diner. It wasn't even saying yes to the job. It was telling the truth, first to Eli, then to Hannah, then to Kay, then to myself. I stopped pretending I could carry it alone. I said, I need help. And the universe didn't punish me with shame. It answered with people who were waiting for me to say the words. Help is not a handout. It's a handoff in a relay where the goal is all of us crossing a line alive. If you're watching this and your life tastes like metal because you've been biting down on a scream, listen, you are not a single point of failure. You are an ecosystem. And ecosystems survive on networks. The one decision you're afraid to make may be less about leaping and more about letting someone stand beside you while you walk to the ledge. Maybe it's filling out the application. Maybe it's calling the tenants group. Maybe it's texting your cousin to say, "Can you watch the baby Thursday so I can go to class?" Maybe it's about telling your child, "It's hard, but we're not broken," and meaning it with your whole tired heart. Before you go, if any part of this story put a hand on your shoulder, subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what decision you're standing on the edge of. Drop a comment with one thing you need this week. Maybe someone here can be your Kay, your Hannah, your Ms. Alvarez. Share this with a mom who's counting breaths in a dark car and needs to know the night can be split open. Because the truth is not a secret. The system may be stacked, but the stacks can be climbed when we learn which rungs are hands. We still live in the same apartment. The landlord still leans in the hall, but now he fixes what leaks. Eli's asthma still flares in February, but we have a humidifier with a silly penguin face. I still keep odd hours sometimes, but the clock no longer snickers when it runs. And when the engine light flickers these days, I do not measure nights in panic. I count the breaths of a boy sleeping under a warm blanket and the soft, steady hum of a future that finally learned my name. Hit subscribe. Tell me your city. Tell me your cliff's edge. I promise to bring back a story from the other side. And if tonight your dashboard is a red clock in a cold parking lot, hear me. You will not always be counting breaths in the dark. The light will come on. Hold fast. The next turn might be the one. But don't look away yet, because there's one more twist waiting for you in your own manila folder, and you'll only find it if you keep going.